All right. Well, now is the part of the program where we talk about some sports, and I think Pete's back on his football bent. If I got your sports huddle right, Pete, I think you guys were interested in talking about football still, even though, of course, the NFL's getting a little quieter by the day. That's not the only league in town, is it?
No, there's some competition out there. There's the UFL, there's the AFL. If we want to call them competition, we're probably really stretching.
Yeah.
Really stretching. And let's be honest, John, one of the reasons why I think since I played in that last couple of years that I played in the World League of American Football that got bought by the NFL and turned into NFL Europe. But, even back then, they were just getting that Fox contract. That's when money started to go through the roof, right? I mean, that Fox TV contract did it all for them. But that being said, it also created the NFL Network and it created all of the rest of it so that we're actually seeing the NFL. They are not done when it comes January or February for Super Bowl. There is something about the NFL every single day, 365 days a year. And if you think I'm wrong, you're wrong, because that's really what it comes down to. And they can still, from a rating standpoint, John, they can put up the NFL draft and it goes up against the NBA, the NHL, or any other sport, Major League Baseball. It's going to crush them. It's going to absolutely crush them. That's how strong they have become. And that's why I think it's so hard now for the AFL, the UFL, and all these leagues that try to come in there. Unfortunately for arena football, which is the AFL, John, this past week, suddenly the wheels came off. And when I say suddenly, we're only 2 weeks, 3 weeks into this season. And there are teams out there. I've got the Georgia Force, the Iowa Rampage, the Philly Soul, all have suspended operations. Minnesota had a head coach by the name of Ricky Foggy, who's one of my closest friends. He was my quarterback at the University of Minnesota. Phenomenally great guy. He just said, I'm walking away. I'm walking away. Now, there's different reasons why, and I'm not even going to get into that, but do you find it just amazing that a league can only get 2 weeks into the season, maybe 3? I think it's 2, and they're already flushing the toilet, John? I mean, what in the world? I mean, how did they not see this coming? What's the deal there? And I know you've got some numbers about the UFL, so give us a little bit about that as far as ratings and everything else.
Sure. Well, the UFL is not all owned by The Rock, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, but he owns a significant piece. And he owned the league that merged to become the UFL because the UFL and another league merged and they decided, okay, well, maybe we have a better chance of surviving like this. The head of Fox Sports, for instance, Pete, owns a significant piece of the league, of the UFL. And just like you said accurately, the survivability is determined a lot on the TV rights and the money you can get from drawing enough eyeballs. And right now they're drawing, scant, but enough eyeballs. They're drawing about 845,000 people a week to watch the first 5 weeks of their season. That's not a bad number. There are a lot of Major League Baseball teams that don't draw numbers like that, quite frankly, unless they're playing Sunday night or something. So they're seeing a big increase in the key advertising demographics, according to what I read, Pete, the 18 to 49-year-olds. And winning does solve almost everything. The two big teams, St. Louis, their opener, Pete, they drew 40,000 people. Now we're 5 weeks in, and I know they're not still drawing that. Right. But the Birmingham, whatever they are, Stallions or something like that, are also doing well. And both teams are 9-1. Mm-hmm. So if you win, people will, tend to gravitate towards it, especially in those two cities. You've got competition in St. Louis, obviously, with the Cardinals, the baseball Cardinals. In Birmingham, not so much. But I would just throw this out there, Pete, that I think a lot of these leagues fail because somebody that tends to have a lot of money that many of us would say is filthy rich tries to be a pig and own the whole thing. And I haven't seen that work out yet.
No.
And I think they got to do the model of the NFL. Now, if The Rock and the head of Fox Sports and a few other people own the UFL, that's okay. But sooner rather than later, they got to start selling those franchises to ownership groups that have enough cash to run it. Because that's been, when you said, how do you fail after 2 weeks? You fail after 2 weeks if you're the AFL because you never got enough money in the kitty.
Right.
You don't let anybody own a team unless they put up a bond or whatever. In the NFL, you have to put up, what is it, Pete? When you and I were talking with the Raiders, 70% has to be in cash.
Yep.
When you're buying a franchise. Well, so with this, do the same thing. Okay, you want something that if you run it right, maybe you have to put 20 or 30 or 50 mil in. But if you run it right, that could be worth 10x that in a very short period of time. Yeah. Because every NFL franchise right now is in the billions, plural. It's not just one.
Right.
They're all in the billions now. So if you could build a survivable franchise in St. Louis or in Birmingham or in any of those cities, even if the whole league doesn't survive, the NFL will gobble that up. And all of a sudden you hit a home run. So if these guys aren't pigs, Pete, they could make it. But if they are pigs, and if The Rock and the guy from Fox want to be the only owners and a couple other minor guys, ain't going to make it.
Right. Yeah. It's tough, man. I mean, the competitive nature of it all, and especially just the NFL and the power that they've got to try to hold you back a little bit. Although they've turned it into a little bit of a, hey, we're the spring league. We're going to stay off of your space and all that kind of stuff. And we'll feed them into you guys or whatever. We'll see how long that lasts. We'll see if that actually does work out. They'll sign some guys from the UFL, I should say, when they get to the NFL. They'll sign some guys for sure. But you know what? It's a matter of how does this whole thing work, and is there going to be a transaction of one or two teams someday? Maybe. Yeah, I mean, it's not completely far-fetched, and it could be an opportunity. How about Major League Baseball, John? We're about a quarter of the way through, so far. And I just wanted to point this out. We've already pointed this out once before, but now that we're getting through a little bit of this season, like I say, we're a quarter of the way through. We've got the Baltimore Orioles, right? Now, if you don't follow it as close as John and I do as far as the money side of things, this is a franchise that has a payroll of $94 million, and they are number one in the AL East. You know who number two is? It's the New York Yankees. Do you know what their payroll is? $303 million. So just make it easy math, 3 times as much money, and they're looking up at Baltimore. Oh, and by the way, you know who number 3 is in the AL East? It's the Boston Red Sox. They got $176 million, John. So they got about, call it 80 million, whatever you want to call it, $80 million more that they're putting in there as far as the payment goes, as far as payroll. Then I just thought it would be fun to say, all right, we've got the Mets. They have the highest payroll of any team, and you and I both know who that is, the owner of that team. $305 million is what their payroll is. You know where they are? They're number 3 in the NL East. These guys aren't even playing 500 baseball. And meanwhile, they're looking up at franchises that are paying far less. They're having more success. And so I guess the question is, how do they do it? Why do they do it? Are they the worst business people ever when it comes to sports? We know in Carolina, there might be a slight issue there on the NFL side. So what is the biggest problem, though? I mean, they've got all the money in the world. They can spend all the money in the world. They'll pay the fines that they've got to pay if they have to. But what do you think, John? Like, I look around and I'm like, well, the Twins have a low payroll. They're doing pretty damn good. Baltimore's got a low payroll. They're doing pretty damn good. You've got teams like Tampa Bay where they are always competitive, and they're somewhere near the bottom 5 in terms of what they're paying these guys on the payroll. So what is it that these big guys just miss so much? What's going on? What do you think?
Well, Brad Pitt starred in that movie Moneyball, Pete.
Yeah.
And it is that there's a difference between putting butts in the seats and putting a winning team on the field. And I will say, Pete, that even though the Yankees and the Mets want to win, they need to get butts in the seats. And it's a very competitive place because there are those 2 teams just across the town. It's not that far from each other. You and I both know that. Citi Field and Yankee Stadium aren't that really far apart. But they're lucky enough to draw from whatever, 25 million people in the Metroplex. When I look at the numbers, Pete, and I look at Miami averaging 33,000 people so far this year, more than the Yankees, more than the Mets. Not that much more, but about 2,000 or 3,000 more per game.
Still.
They are crushing it in terms of the Moneyball stuff, because it doesn't matter about the winning. They're getting the butts in the seats, Pete. And, so with a lower payroll, Miami's just got to be printing money. Here's another one. San Diego's number 3. They're doing 31,000 people per game. Again, that's more than the Mets, because the Yankees and Mets are like, let me see, 30,800 for the Yankees, and for the Mets, 30,300. So these guys are almost 1,000 people more per game. Now, 1,000 people isn't making that big a difference, but when your payroll is what the San Diego Padres payroll is, or the Miami, whatever the hell they are, Pete. Marlins. Yeah, the Marlins. I can't remember seeing a Marlins game in a decade. It's been that long. I don't see them ever. And yet they're putting people in the stadium. And like to your point, they put them in Tampa, and you and I know the owners, because a bunch of former Goldman guys that own the Tampa Bay Rays. And they've won a World Series down there with, one of the lowest payrolls in baseball. So low payroll and a lot of butts in the seats, you're doing pretty well. But if you want to win, you got to play it slightly different. And that's different than just putting butts in the seats.
Yeah, it's amazing how in whatever the sport may be, you look around, you go, look at how much money they put into this 1, 2, or 3 players on that team that it just tears the team apart too, because you got 3 guys, 4 guys making all the money, and the rest of the guys really not making anything close to that. And you got to wonder, sitting around in the locker room, how does that really go well with everybody or not? That's kind of interesting. Well, a lot of fun, John. It's a good kickoff to this early part of the week. And by the way, this past week is one of the best weeks in the market this year. So it just shows you that even though there's a lot of interesting things going on in the stock market, we're still looking at a market that's got a lot of people excited. So you know what? When volatility gets low, it's never a bad idea to maybe look for some protection out there.